Story 1. Several years ago, I was up in the northern end of BC in the islands out by Port Hardy. I set up camp right by the beach close to shore and did the normal catch a fish, cook it for dinner on the campfire thing. Perfect, really. A few hours pass and it's getting dark. I climb into the tent and fall asleep quickly. I get woken up by hefty breathing on the beach from something big. In the area of my fire, but the tide was in now, so the waves would have covered it. My first thought was bear, but on the islands where I was, bears were not common at all, to the point that there hasn't been one documented ever. This is blasting through my mind. But then the urban talk of Bigfoot runs through my mind at this point. I'm like, there is no such thing as Bigfoot, so what the hell is it? I gain my courage and open my tent. I shine my flashlight around, but I don't see anything, so I get out of my tent. I'm shining my light around when I hear it again. This huge breath was followed by a small splash. I focus my light on the beach when I see a massive orca rolling around on the kelp right about where my fire was. This behemoth of a marine mammal scared the living shit out of it, but it turned into being one of the most amazing events I ever witnessed. As I sat watching this massive animal rolling and playing yards from me, I noticed more of them just offshore, just bobbing there, prob half asleep. Needless to say, I did not sleep after that. Story 2. My boyfriend and I were camping in Peter Lougheed Provincial Park, AB, this past summer. On the last night of our stay, as I'm falling asleep, my BF tells me I've been pushing him off his side of the air mattress. I was trying to steal heat from him as he's a human furnace, and asks me to give him room. Sounds good? We go to sleep. I wake up to him shoving me and think I'm crowding him by accident, so I move over a little. He shoves me harder, and I'm annoyed now because I already moved and I'm tired, so I somewhat loudly say, "I'm moving," and he grabs me and shushes me. I know something is wrong and I am awake right away. He whispers very softly, "Do you hear something?" And right away I hear the unmistakable exhaling huff of a bear right by my head. My heart is pounding because at this point, I can hear it sniffing us and huffing, which is not good if you know grizzlies. My BF says we need to get to our truck and I agree, but from what I can hear, the bear is between our tent and truck. Luckily, we had command start, and our truck had a very aggressive start, so when my BF started the truck, I heard some crashing through the trees and we both ran to the truck. We drove a lap around our campground to make sure the bear hadn't gone into anyone else's sight, but didn't see it. We slept in the truck until it was light out and let the wildlife hotline in the area know before we left. We started second-guessing ourselves because this all happened at about 1:30 a.m., but when we were packing up the tent, that next day we found coarse brown hair all over the side of the tent where our heads were and on the grill of the truck. I've never been so terrified and full of adrenaline in my life. Story 3. Backpacking in the woods with a group. I'm a bit of an insomniac, so I was up far after everyone else. We wanted to pack as light as possible, and it was summer, so we just had a tarp on the ground and put our sleeping bags on top of it, so we are completely out in the open. It was after midnight and I was still tossing and turning. Then I hear footsteps. I had heard a deer, coyote, or something else with 4 legs running through the brush earlier, but this was definitely bipedal. Whoever it was came right to the edge of the clearing, about 15 from us. I could just barely make out a shadow of the figure, but it was pitched black out and hard to tell what it looked like. It looked like it was swaying side to side or looking around the clearing. Then it turned and rushed into the woods and I heard the running footsteps. Once they faded into the distance, I finally felt like I could breathe. I was considering waking someone up. Then I heard the most blood-curdling scream from the direction the thing went. I shook my friend awake, who was more experienced and familiar with the area. All he said was, "Dude, it's just a fox. Go back to sleep." I told him I heard the footsteps and saw it, and it was not a fox, but he just dismissed it completely and insisted I go back to sleep. I sat there for what felt like forever, feeling paranoid and scared, until I just gave up and took an extra dose of my sleep meds because I figured the anticipation was worse than being killed in my sleep. Story 4. I was spending 3 days kayaking on the Coorong. I was having a great time and really enjoying the serenity, listening to the native birds and just appreciating nature. On the first day, I heard what I could have sworn was a human not screaming, screeching, I guess. I didn't think much of it and kept paddling. I saw what looked like a body close to the shore and found a seal that had just been eviscerated. Honestly, this thing was spread all over the beach. No footprints of any kind, just a seal in 100 pieces. After the screeching and the seal, I was a little creeped out but just continued my trip. Nothing of event really happened that night except that I kept hearing splashes from the water in front of me. Yet when I checked, there was nothing there. The next day I went out again with the same plan, just paddle until I get tired and then set up camp and go to bed. Unfortunately for me, I got stuck on mud bog and had to spend a solid hour dragging my kayak across this thing to get to the other side of the water where I saw a deeper channel and a bunch of sand dunes. After what felt like maybe 40 minutes of struggling with my kayak in this bog, I saw a figure atop one of the sand dunes. Logically, it was probably a random tourist like me or maybe a kangaroo. I stared at it for a second before getting back to trying to cross this bog. When I looked back, it was gone. Weird. Anyway, I set up camp for my last night. I was a bit creeped out by the seal and the noises and now this figure, so I made sure I had my knife with me. I set up my tent a bit away from the water in an open area so I could see everything around me. As I was eating dinner, I couldn't help but feel I was being watched, as it was a total fire ban in the area. I didn't have a fire, so I couldn't see much. I chalked it up to nerves and went for a short walk to explore the area I was in and wander down to the beach. Now for some context, the beach near me is low. You can't hear much other than crashing waves, which makes what happened next especially eerie. I heard that fucking screeching again and looked back to where I came from. Again, a figure was standing in right by the path where I walked to the beach. Fuck that, I thought. I pulled my knife out and approached where I thought I saw this thing. There was just a weak old fish that looked like it had been hung on the fence and forgotten. As I walked back down the path, I heard what sounded like a kangaroo or wallaby just lightly hopping behind me, but when I looked back, there was nothing there. Honestly, I just climbed into my tent and prayed to God there was nothing around. It's kind of anticlimactic, but nothing else really happened. I think I heard that screeching once more, and then I didn't hear it again. Apparently, there are a few indigenous graveyards in the area. I'm not one for superstition, but if I'm being honest, this experience really spooked me. Story 5. Back in mid or late October, I was camping on the San Juan Islands off the Washington coast in the little inlet that separates the Olympic Peninsula from the rest of Washington. My last night before returning to the mainland, I stayed in the campground in a state park on one of the islands. That campground happened to be just 2 miles or so away from the highest point in the rather hilly archipelago. Hiking to the top of Mount Constitution was the main reason I went back to that island before finishing my time on the islands. But I was initially just planning to do it whenever I happened to wake up the next morning. But that evening, as I lay in my tent, I realized it would be really cool to watch the sunrise from the top. So I set an alarm for 4 around a.m. I figured that would give me plenty of time to be on the trail by 4:45. Figure it's roughly 2 hours to the top, and that would get me to the summit right around first light at 6:45 before the 7:15 or 7:30 sunrise. I forgot that the batteries in my headlamp were nearing the end of their life. My headlamp was pretty much useless in actually seeing where I was going, although it did cast just enough light to reflect off the eyes of all the animals watching me through the woods. Presumably just deer, but it still freaked me out. The entire 2 hours I was constantly noticing them. It was never just a single pair of eyes either, but always 2 or 3 animals together. They never made a noise, never even moved, just stood there watching me. My other really freaky experience happened a few years ago. My dad and I loaded some camping gear onto the back of our bicycles and left our home in Wisconsin to ride around a part of the state for a few days. I don't like paying to sleep on the ground, so about an hour before dark, we'd start looking for somewhere we could disappear into the woods to pitch our tent for the night. On, I think, the second night, we found a small grass path through the woods that went to a farm field quite a ways off. We pitched our tent to one side of the path and quickly fell asleep. Until around 2 hours that night, when we were wandering up by a sort of snorting sound outside the tent. Every, 30 seconds. A minute, we'd hear the noise come out of the woods behind us. Figuring it was likely just a deer whose path from the woods to the farm field we were blocking. Dad and I just started talking loudly to each other about it, hoping our voices would scare it away. When that didn't work, I tried shining my light through the wall of the tent. Eventually, I ended up getting out of the tent, waving the light in the direction of the noise and yelling at it to go away. And then we never heard it again. I never saw so much as a pair of eyes reflecting the light, nor did I hear any plants moving around as they ran away, but the snorting sound stopped. Even though it most likely was just a deer, I had never heard a noise quite like that before. Once we fully woke up, we would regain our wits, but in that brief period where we were only half awake, it was a terrifying noise. Story 6. Years back, I was out solo backpacking in the Pecos wilderness of northern NM. Camping about 6-hour hike from the nearest pavement way up past Porto Nambe, I typically used an enclosed camping hammock, lightweight, bug-proof, and packs up small with a rainfly. No need to carry a pad or mat, just need 2 trees, easy and perfect for solo when you're in it with the full fly on. You don't have any real visibility around you. The top was totally enclosed by a bug screen. To get inside, you sort of climbed into a slit in the bottom, and then your weight pulled and held it closed. It worked well, but it was a convoluted process to get in and out of. I picked a spot just at the edge of the tree line, so I could cook on the edge of the meadow with a view of Santa Fe Baldy. Ate dinner, cleaned up bags and trees, looked at probably a billion stars, and then processed myself into the hammock for the night. At some point, in the pitch black, I bolted awake to crunching footsteps in the pine needles around me. It was the kind of awake where you go from fast asleep to instantly hyper-aware but totally frozen. I make absolutely no sound. I can't look outside. Lighting a light would only illuminate the hammock like a lamp and leave me totally blind to the surroundings. The crunching continues, as if it's circling the hammock. I'm not sure how long I held my breath. The crunching is right alongside me. I have zero clue what it is. Suddenly, something pushes against the side of my hammock, and in the hammock, that means it pushed against me. I could feel its body heat. This isn't a tent wall where you can cower away from it. If you lean, the hammock moves with you. Whatever, it seemed to use its snout to nuzzle or root against the side of the hammock like it was sniffing something out. I was still holding deathly still, trying to come up with a plan to get away, which would involve trying to slash the opposite side with my knife. The thing pushes again and slides up the side of the hammock. I could feel the texture of its fur, hide, hair, whatever, scraping against the nylon side. I hear a sharp snort and it crunches away. I'm not sure how long I stayed absolutely still, but at some point the sun came up, and I ventured into the daylight. I looked around the campsite and could find no evidence of a visitor. The tree line edge was floored with pine needles, so there were no prints or tracks. None of my other gear was disturbed. The guy lines for the fly were all still tight, and I didn't see any marks on the side of the hammock. Couldn't even find a broken twig. I'm not sure it even happened. Story 7. About a year ago, I was camping along the PCT in Washington. It was late October and getting to around freezing in the middle of the night in the mountains. So there were no other people, which was what I wanted. I got to the trail late and hiked with my dog for a while in the dark with my headlamp. We found a place that was a few hundred feet from a small river. It wasn't loud, but you could hear it. I get to work starting a fire when my dog suddenly starts barking. I'm pretty paranoid, so I keep a 3800 lumen flashlight and a big knife on me. I whirl around, shine the light, and grab the knife. Nothing. I sweep the trees, looking for the reflection of my eyes. Still nothing. Dogs are on alert, but not barking. I get back to work, and this happens a few times. Each time I grab the knife and light, but can't see anything. Eventually, I search the brush around the clearing, but still nothing, so I went to bed thinking maybe something small. 1 a.m., and I'm woken up by something rustling around outside. By the sound, I think it was probably the size of a coyote. I don't get out of the tent. About 3 a.m., I'm woken up by a loud screech and 2 large animals bolting through my clearing. It's cold and dark, and most of the way up a mountain, so there shouldn't be anything. I'm a little freaked out, so I grab my knife and listen in the tent. There's a screech in the distance, then nothing. Ultimately, I woke up and it was raining, so no prints and nothing else happened. But sure, freaked me out. If I had to guess, I'd say a goat or something with hooves became a midnight snack for whatever was lurking around my sight. Story 8. I was in Lincoln State Park in southwestern Indiana. My family and I were staying in cabins they have there, so it's not exactly the most remote area, though there is a lot of wooded land. I took a hike all alone to the fire tower, which I've done dozens of times before, and made it to the very top. I enjoyed the view for a bit, and then climbed down and started going back because it was getting dark. I was walking on the trail not far from the tower when all of a sudden, I felt this great sense of warning and terror. It was a suddenly random huge wave of terror and dread I had never felt. It was like some sudden spidey sense kicked in, and it telling me to get out of there now or I was going to die. I didn't fight it and started running back to the campgrounds, then heard something moving through the woods like it was running alongside the path. I looked to my right and saw a very big brow blur and what looked like a giant brown arm flail about, and then whatever that thing was veered off and quickly moved away from. That didn't comfort me at all, and I went into a flat-out sprint at a speed that would probably rival Usain Bolt, and didn't stop until I got to the trailer camping area where I finally had to catch my breath. To this day, I think that it might have been a Bigfoot, as the only other plausible explanations are that it was a brown bear, which is near impossible as Indiana only has an occasional black bear, and those are much smaller. It could have been a person, but it would have to be a big person, as in a 7+ foot tall bodybuilder, and I don't think there are any 7+ foot tall bodybuilders that like to wear brown clothes and then go mess with people in the woods. And it also doesn't explain the sudden wave of sheer terror I felt. That is the only time I've ever had any type of sudden, strong spidey sense like that in my life. Story 9. My boyfriend, an experienced camper, and I, never camped before, decided to go camping at a local lake in early October. We did all the typical glamping prep with plans for s'mores, campfire food, and eventually sleeping in a tent on the bank of the lake. However, timing was not on our side, and we only got to the campsite about 30 minutes before dark, so we rushed to set everything up. For context, I am a scaredy cat who is not a nature-loving person, and practically had to be convinced to go camping. I had full trust that everything was going to work out, and any ill feelings were just because of me overthinking and generally being inexperienced. But back to that night, we had eaten dinner and decided to go into the tent to hang out until we went to sleep. It was eerily quiet outside the tent, and the only thing we could hear was the wind against the rain cover of the tent. I realized that my boyfriend was trying to cover how anxious he was because he kept stopping mid-conversation, wide-eyed, to listen to any small noise outside. I jokingly made a comment about skinwalkers, and I could tell that really freaked him out. He also is typically a person who blasts music but asked if he could turn it off, which was out of character. Around 9:30 we decided to go to sleep, and it being a small tent I could hear his breathing. He is typically the type to fall asleep in 5 minutes, but we both stayed awake for almost an hour attempting to sleep. He eventually broke the silence by telling me we had to leave because he felt like someone was outside our tent. I quickly agreed, and boy oh boy, there was nobody we could see, but we both felt undeniably not alone. Another thing was, after we got back to our place, he was telling me about how he was thinking of where the hatchet we had was, and how he could defend us if need be. This is extremely out of character because he is a 615 pacifist who prides himself of being able to use words to avoid conflict, especially because he has always been extremely comfortable in nature and woods in general. Hearing that from him made it even more clear the headspace that place put us in. It really put us both in the fight-or-flight mentality. The entire night felt like the first 5 minutes of a supernatural episode. We grabbed all our stuff and ran back to the car, and we both didn't relax until we were out of those godforsaken woods. It may not seem like a huge deal because nothing explicitly happened, but the fact that both of us had such an overwhelming sense of anxiety and genuine fear for no explicit reason was one of the most terrifying things I have experienced. Story 10. I was staying in a cabin in the middle of the mountains of eastern Tennessee alone as part of a solo hiking, camping getaway. Also, to preface the story, let me add that this cabin did not have window curtains on any windows, and the front door had a glass window as part of the door. My first night at the cabin went as usual. I ate dinner and then laid down on the couch to relax and eventually fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I jolted awake when I heard 3 incredibly loud thump sounds, which I immediately thought were footsteps inside the cabin. on the hardwood floors. I looked around the interior of the cabin from the couch and didn't see anyone, and I also didn't hear any strange noises. I always have my handgun on me when I go alone to the way backcountry areas of the mountains, because let's be honest, you never really know what's going to happen, and since I was able to drive to the cabin, the extra weight of my gun was no issue. I also had been sleeping with my handgun right next to me in its holster. I grabbed it and looked outside all the windows and didn't see anything, so I laid back down. I didn't hear anything else out of the ordinary the rest of the night. The next morning after I had woken up and eaten breakfast, I was getting ready to leave the cabin for a hikey, so I grabbed all my gear and locked it up. As they went to walk down the 3 steps to the ground, I noticed that each step was a bit loose and would make a loud stomping sound as they took each step. I immediately froze, and I recognized the sound from the steps and the 3 loud thumps I heard during the night. Instead of leaving the cabin at that moment, I went ahead and drew my gun and cleared the outside area surrounding the cabin, and then also went back inside and cleared each room of the cabin to make sure there was nothing weird inside or outside the cabin. I mostly did that just for my own personal sanity reasons, after I correlated the sounds during the night to the sounds of the stairs as you walk on them. Let's just say I returned to the cabin well before dark that day, and took blankets from around the house and hung them up over all the windows that night for some extra privacy, and also slept, more like laid there waiting to hear that noise from the steps, on the couch again. Nothing strange happened after the initial incident. Honestly, don't know what happened, who or what walked on the steps or made the noises, but damn, was I happy to leave the cabin after that. Story 11. Me and my whole family are very avid hunters in Saskatchewan, Canada. We were hunting bear for meat, and my brother managed to shoot one with a rifle, but it was not the greatest shot, and just nicked the lung, so the bear ran far before dying. When we all arrived to help drag out this bear, it was pitch black out and in a very thick forest. We took our flashlights and followed the blood trail until we found it bears. It ran about 1.5 kilometers from where it was shot. My dad took one of the flashlights and went to get a hand winch to help drag this bear up a steep bank. He left me and my 2 brothers with a flashlight and a rifle because there are a lot of bears in the area and are very active at night. We sat around in the middle of the forest for a while, waiting for my dad to come back, around 1 hour, and I took my iPod Touch out and started playing Angry Birds when all of a sudden, my little brother screamed looking at me. I turned my head around, and about 1, maybe 2 feet away from my head, I see 2 sets of eyes glistening from the light of my iPod. My older brother shines the light at the eyes, and I see 2 brown snouts and black bodies. It was a mother and a cub bear. Next, I can hear the mother bear do a chomping sound with her jaw. At this point, I am literally shading my pants. I got off the log so fast I could have won the Olympics for the 50-yard dash. My brother thankfully shot 1 warning shot beside the bears. We aren't cold-blooded. Thankfully, that was enough to scare them both away. My dad came running to us and was there about 10 minutes after the shot. Turns out his light died on the way back to the truck, and he had been lost for the last 30 minutes. I am just thankful we had a gun and that my little brother saw the eyes, because bears can be very quiet when they want to be. This could have ended up very badly. I no longer am chill when in the forest at night, always on edge. I'm sure this will stick with me for the rest of my life. Story 12. I did a bit of primitive camping when I was in my late teens. Very, very minimal. Just a sleeping bag, jacket, water bottle, and firefighting kit. This was my first overnight, and I was really roughing it. The idea was to build my own shelter, a basic debris hut, and stay the night. I made my way through coastal Australian bush terrain for about an hour from a track that was already deep in to find a decent spot, well away from anything man-made. I found the spot. A nice little pocket of sandy dirt that was not covered in undergrowth. Finally, I said out loud, pretty exhausted. I cleared the area a little, built the shelter, and started a really small fire as it got dark. I just sat there, listening to the sounds of nature around me, not thinking, but just listening, and the sound of the fire crackling. It was beautiful. I felt relaxed and tired. So, I put out the fire well, retreated into my hut, and went to sleep. I awoke to the most gut-wrenching sound I have ever heard. I didn't know what time it was. It was absolutely pitch black. This horrible noise that I could only describe as some kind of demonic gargling from the depths of the primordial earth was coming from only a few feet in front of my hut. I couldn't see anything. It was pitch black, but it was right fucking there. Panicked, I dug for my emergency phone out of my bag to turn it on to use it as a light. I was gripping hard with my right hand a spear I had made during the evening, just a bit of hardwood with the tip sharpened and tempered on the fire to harden the point. I was glad I had it and had it pointed directly out of the hut at the source of the noise. I was growling back at it in reaction to my own fear. The phone finally turned on, but its light was faint. I could barely see a foot front and I couldn't see anything. The noise stopped. There was rustling around the clearing, and then silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, needless to say, and truly appreciated the light of the sun when it started coming up, more than I ever have. I packed up and went home. I was left rattled by the experience. Fast forward about a year later, I was camping at a campsite with some of my mates, having beers around our fire. It was night and I heard it again. Adrenaline kicked in and I wanted to know what it was. I was going to confront it even if I got hurt. As I abruptly stood up ready for battle, my mate says, "Bloody koalas, fuck, they sound weird." It was koalas. The whole time it was just horny, fluffy little bastards.
The end. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.